I've lived most of my life in the strange half-light between being seen and being misunderstood. People think fame gives you armor, that cameras build some kind of shell around your heart. But the truth is simpler and far more humiliating. The more the world watches you, the easier it becomes for them to see you break. And in the summer of 1991, I broke. 3 days before my wedding. 3 days before I was supposed to walk down an aisle with a smile wide enough to convince the world that everything was perfect, that love was enough, that I, Julia Roberts, America's sweetheart, had finally found something stable, something real. I was 23, but in Hollywood years that felt ancient. Everyone around me talked as if I should already have it all figured out. The career, the marriage, the fairy tale. No one cared that inside I still felt like that young girl from Smyrna, terrified of disappointing people, desperate for something that felt like home. I remember waking up that morning with my heart already racing. I hadn't even opened my eyes yet. My body knew before my mind did. Something was wrong. Terribly, unmistakably wrong. People imagine infidelity as a loud, dramatic discovery, catching someone in the act, a confrontation, a door slammed. But that's not how it happened for me. My truth arrived quietly, almost politely, like a knock I didn't want to answer. I had heard whispers about Kiefer before, rumors that he was confused, wild, not ready. But in Hollywood, rumors grew on trees. If you listened to all of them, you'd die of paranoia. So I dismissed it. I told myself love was supposed to be messy, dramatic, unpredictable. And maybe I believed that more deeply than I should have. When the truth finally reached me, when I learned he had been seeing another woman, someone from the set, I didn't scream. I didn't even cry at first. I just felt this almost clinical clarity, the kind that comes when your body goes into emotional shock. My hands went cold. My throat tightened. The room around me tilted, like gravity was suddenly unreliable. And the worst part? Even in that moment, a part of me still wondered if it was my fault. Was I too busy? Too demanding? Too fragile? Too visible? Did the attention he hated push him away? Did loving me require a kind of strength he didn't have? This is what happens when you're a woman raised to keep the peace, to make things work, to be grateful for love even when it hurts. I sat in my bathroom for almost an hour, fully dressed, staring at my reflection in silence. I looked like myself, but nothing inside me matched the face in the mirror. My eyes were swollen and restless, as if they weren't sure where to land. My lips trembled even when I wasn't speaking. I kept thinking, I can't do this. I can't marry someone who doesn't love me the way he promised. But then came the second thought, the more frightening one. What will people say? Not my family, not my friends, the world, the tabloids, the strangers who thought they owned me because they recognized my face. I'd already been accused of being difficult, emotional, unpredictable. I'd been picked apart for my relationships, my choices, my smile, my laugh, the way I walked. If I canceled the wedding, if I backed out at the last second, I knew exactly what the headlines would say. Julia Roberts, runaway bride. Years before it ever became script. The irony isn't lost on me now. But in that moment, the idea of disappointing millions of people felt heavier than disappointing myself. I spent the rest of the day moving like a ghost. People came in and out of my house, planners, stylists, assistants, decorators, chatting about flower arrangements and seating charts while I floated from room to room trying to convince myself to breathe. Everyone treated me like a bride. No one saw I wasn't one anymore. Not truly. The only person who sensed something was off was my best friend. She kept looking at me with that quiet, searching expression, the one that said, Julia, something is cracking inside you. Tell me before it collapses. But I couldn't, because saying it out loud would make it real. That night, I finally allowed myself to cry. Not pretty, cinematic tears. Not the kind that fall gracefully and leave your mascara intact. These were the tears that come from the deepest part of you, the part you hope no one ever sees. I cried until my chest hurt, until my eyes felt bruised, until I couldn't distinguish the pain from the exhaustion. I thought about every woman I had played on screen, women who chose love, fought for it, sacrificed for it, women who looked so strong in the final act. But I didn't feel like any of them. I felt weak and small, and ashamed of wanting to be loved so badly that I ignored the truth when it was right in front of me. I wasn't afraid of being alone. I was afraid of being wrong. But clarity has its own timing. And when it comes like a revelation. The next morning, I woke up with my pillow still damp from tears, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something that wasn't fear. I felt certainty. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It didn't come with anger or revenge fantasies. It was calm, almost peaceful. A quiet voice inside me whispered, "Julia, you cannot marry him. You cannot build a life on a foundation that keeps cracking beneath your feet." My hands were steady when I stood up. My breath was slow. I think I knew, even then, that choosing myself would cost me something. A perfect image, a planned future, a wedding that the whole world expected to happen. But there's a moment every woman reaches in her life, famous or not, when she has to decide whether she will keep performing her happiness for others or start living it for herself. I chose myself, and choosing myself meant leaving. The hours after that decision blurred together. A few frantic phone calls. A few stunned silences. Some people were sympathetic, others discreetly annoyed. Hollywood doesn't like unpredictability. It likes stories that fit neatly into a narrative. A broken engagement 3 days before the wedding was not neat. I could feel the judgment forming even as I packed my bags. How could she? Why would she? What did she do? In this industry, the blame always finds the woman first. I didn't wait for the headlines. I didn't wait for the explanations. I didn't wait for the apologies that might never come. I left. I got on a plane to Ireland with my best friend, desperately needing distance, geographical and emotional, from the life that had collapsed around me. I remember looking out the window as the plane lifted, the clouds swallowing Los Angeles beneath them, and for the first time in months, I exhaled without my chest tightening. People later said I fled. Maybe that's true. But back then, it didn't feel like running away. It felt like survival. Ireland was cold, quiet, unbothered by my heartbreak or my fame. The ocean didn't care who I was. The rain didn't ask for pictures. The wind didn't whisper gossip. I could breathe there. I could think. And slowly, very slowly, I began to understand something that would take me years to fully accept. Leaving wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of becoming a woman who could choose her own life, not just the life people expected her to live. Ireland met me with rough wind and a kind of silence that felt unfamiliar. There was no schedule waiting for me, no assistants knocking on doors, no makeup chairs or people whispering in hallways about what I should be doing next. It was the first place in years where no one expected anything from me. That alone was disorienting. The trip wasn't planned with any elegance. I packed quickly, barely thinking about what I threw into my bag. The decision to go came from instinct, not strategy. I didn't know whether I was running for my life or simply trying to find a place where my thoughts wouldn't feel so loud. Whatever the reason, Ireland allowed me to step outside the version of myself that had been shrinking for months. My best friend stayed close throughout those first days. She sensed the heaviness that followed me from room to room. I wasn't ready to talk about any of it, not because the subject hurt too much, but because naming everything aloud made it feel permanent. She never pushed. She just stayed near, offering presence instead of advice. The mornings were the hardest. I woke up unsure of where I was for a few seconds, and then everything rushed back. The canceled wedding, the betrayal, the public scrutiny that I hadn't even seen yet but could already imagine. My stomach tightened each time the reality hit. I had built so much of my life around what the next step was supposed to be, and suddenly there was no next step. Only space. On one of those mornings, the rain hit the windows so steadily, it sounded like a slow drum. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea growing cold between my hands. My friend watched me from across the room and eventually suggested a walk along the cliffs. I agreed because doing nothing felt unbearable. The air outside was sharp and clean. The path curved along the edge of the cliffs, and the ocean below looked endless. The wind kept pulling my hair across my face, and for a moment, The physical discomfort grounded me more than anything else had in days. We walked without speaking. I didn't feel ready for conversation, and she seemed to understand that. Eventually, we reached a point where the cliff widened just enough to sit. I lowered myself onto a flat stone, feeling the cold surface through my clothes. The ocean moved in a steady rhythm below. Watching it helped me settle into myself in a way that had felt impossible since the truth about Kiefer surfaced. My friend finally asked if I regretted leaving. The question didn't land as an accusation. It felt more like an invitation to check in with myself. I didn't answer immediately. I studied the water for a long time, tracing the way the waves broke against the rocks. What I truly regretted was how long I had carried the burden alone. I had noticed the small changes in him. The distracted looks, the sudden distance, the way he pulled back from plans he once seemed excited about. But I kept explaining it away, telling myself that stress or fame or pressure were to blame. I convinced myself the relationship would stabilize once the wedding arrived. My own desperation for normalcy had blinded me to everything else. When I finally answered, I said I didn't regret leaving. The words felt unfamiliar coming out, as if they belonged to a version of myself I was only beginning to meet. But they were true. The days that followed stretched like soft fabric, long, slow, and nothing like my usual life. I existed without deadlines or cameras. I didn't feel healed, but I didn't feel hunted either. That contrast alone softened me in places I had kept guarded. Then, of course, the tabloids caught on. One morning, a stack of newspapers arrived at the hotel desk. I didn't look through them myself. My friend brought them to me with a careful expression that told me everything. Instead of reading them, I asked her to put them away. I already knew what they would say. People may think scandal hardens you, but what it truly does is strip away your patience. I didn't have the energy to fight narratives created by people who had never met me. What I did have was a slow-growing understanding of my own limits. I finally saw how much I had tolerated simply because I didn't want to be seen as unstable or demanding. Hollywood rewards women who appear effortless. I had spent years trying to fit that image, smoothing the edges of myself, so I wouldn't be too much. Ireland exposed how deeply that habit ran. When I returned to the United States, I felt like I was walking back into a life that no longer belonged to me. My home looked the same, but I didn't feel the same inside it. The wedding dress still hung in a garment bag in the guest room. I couldn't bring myself to touch it, so I left it where it was and focused on work. Work became the one place where I didn't have to think about the collapse of my personal life. On set, I had structure. I had direction. I had lines to deliver and marks to hit. None of that required emotional guesswork. After everything that had happened, the reliability of that routine brought a kind of relief I didn't expect. But late at night, when I returned to an empty home, the silence felt heavier than before. I tried reading. I tried playing music. I tried cooking, though I barely ate. Nothing distracted me for long. The stillness made room for thoughts I didn't want to revisit, memories of conversations that had felt off, moments I had brushed aside, red flags I had repainted white. It took time to accept that I had ignored my instincts. Not because I was naive, but because I had wanted the relationship to succeed so badly that I quieted my own discomfort. Grieving the end of the engagement wasn't just about losing him. It was also about confronting the parts of myself that had stayed silent when I should have spoken. But something subtle started shifting as the months passed. I noticed myself saying no more clearly, without long explanations. I noticed the way I stepped out of meetings earlier, when I felt drained instead of pushing through. I noticed that my friendships deepened because I let people see me without the usual gloss of pretending everything was fine. The confidence that emerged during that period didn't arrive as a sudden revelation. It grew in small ways, through honest conversations, healthier boundaries, moments of choosing rest instead of guilt. It was a slow return to myself rather than a reinvention. And eventually, that steadier version of me made space for people who treated me with genuine care. Relationships after Kiefer were complicated, but they weren't shaped by fear. I learned to listen to my discomfort instead of brushing it aside. I learned the difference between attention and intimacy. Most importantly, I learned that partnership doesn't require shrinking. Years later, meeting Danny felt different from everything that came before him. Not cinematic, not chaotic, not the kind of love that arrives with fireworks. It was steady, quiet,
Real.
I felt understood without having to translate myself. By the time we married, I wasn't searching for someone to anchor me. I had already found my footing. Looking back, the canceled wedding didn't define me the way people expected it to. What defined me was the aftermath, the long stretch of time where I rebuilt without making a spectacle of it. Those months taught me to trust my own judgment again. They taught me how to choose without apologizing. They taught me that dignity isn't the absence of mistakes, it's the ability to live with them honestly. Hollywood still loves the runaway bride folklore. I've heard the jokes for decades, but I don't flinch at them anymore. That moment didn't break my life. It redirected it. Leaving wasn't dramatic courage. It was simple clarity. I stepped away from something that felt wrong, even though the entire world was already watching. And the woman I became after that choice owes her strength to the one who made it.